Hey, so welcome to this week's rendition of Attune to the Moon's Week Ahead in the astrology. We'll do a little astro update here for YouTube, and then once we're done, we'll turn off the YouTube and we'll keep you here and we'll do the mini readings. So this week, actually, do you want to start, Nadia? Because I feel like this week is more about the ingresses than it is about the, there is some good astrology happening this week, but do you want to start?
Yeah, give me one sec. There's so much astro going on, but at the same time, it's so much we can't even cover it in like 2 hours. So the ingresses are more important because they're like the broad strokes, right? So we have, I'm going to talk about the ingresses not on like an individual level because there's so much going on, but just sort of like the general energy of what we're moving into. I'm calling it the summer of radical contemplation, compassion, and expression. And not in like the typical Leo way where we're trying to be our boldest, most confident selves. Actually, it's about sitting in the heart. And I think with Mercury and just being in the heart space and having a deep curiosity about what's going on in our heart. So Mercury enters Leo today until August 11th. Mercury's moving super fast right now. And so we're coming into a time of, yes, dramatic expression, whether we want to do that through voice or dance or just existing in the moment. And yes, we will be looking for a little bit of flair. This is a good time to start projects that you've been wanting to work on, especially since Venus is in Virgo, Mars is moving into Virgo. So it's organizing those dramatic words in a cohesive way, because we all know, or maybe you don't, if you're like a Virgo stellia, maybe it's easier for you to do this. But if you're hyper expressive or creative person, it's not always easy to organize your thoughts and organize things that are just this dramatic creativity that's going on inside of you. So we're going to be just deeply curious about everything, especially those parts of ourselves that feel very soulful, very heart-centered. This is a good time to have heart-opening talks with everyone in the collective chart. So the chart of the aspect, the chart of Mercury entering Leo, the Sun in Leo is applying into a conjunction with Mercury at this moment. Sun conjunct Mercury helps to expand the attributes of Mercury and sort of radiate that out a little bit more. So people might be a little bit more positive, a little bit more optimistic. You also might be hearing people talk about their get into their ego just a little bit more with the way that they're communicating, especially because Leo is ruled by the sun. So things are going to heat up in a way that isn't going to necessarily be in bad at all, but you will be having to contend with people's egos and sort of their own just themselves, the essence of themselves and things. So also in this collective chart, Mercury is trining the moon in Pisces. So this is going to be making emotions during this aspect easier to communicate and deal with, connecting to your spiritual essence as part of your core identity and as part of your sense of self. So this is why I said this is about radical contemplation, sitting in your heart space, because we really, really want to get deeper in our practices, like dramatically deeper into our practices, and also infuse them with a greater sense of joy and connection, rather than just getting right into the shadow of it. We want a little bit of happiness in our lives. Part of that comes with the shadow of it is that Mercury is opposition Pluto. It's coming out of that opposition Pluto, but it's still in the chart of this aspect. And so we're still mastering the mind, mastering our fears, mastering our anxieties around our competencies, because it's Pluto's in Capricorn. So about money, structure, security, if we're competent, if we have the authority. So we're still doing a little bit of an investigation process in that, but we're coming out of that aspect. And that's going to be the fuel for the creative fire that we're moving into. And then on August 10th, right before Mercury goes into Virgo, we will have Mercury opposition Jupiter And I think we'll feel like we know everything that we need to know, but when Mercury hits Virgo, we're going to refine those wild ideas and be like, oh, I guess I didn't know everything that I needed to know, because this is a little bit impractical. But this is your time to start in an impractical way and then work your way up, like really get into that creative spirit, that creative energy, and really work yourself up into like how you're going to organize it in a more productive way. So speaking of Jupiter is entering Aquarius tomorrow. So moving out of Pisces, going back into Aquarius. If you're I think one of you, I think it was Lindsay, you heard this is your Jupiter return year. So it's going back into Aquarius. So you're going to feel that Aquarius energy a little bit brighter in your chart. Jupiter in Pisces was just, I want to say like a mind, I'm not going to say it because it's YouTube, just like a roller coaster. And so we're going to go back into Aquarius. It's going to be a little bit easier, I think, but also showing us sort of the things that we were a little bit deluded about in Jupiter and Pisces, especially on like a grand social scale. But Jupiter is this great benefic, and that Jupiter shows us how we can be expanded, how we can evolve, and how we can be exalted. Jupiter is currently retrograde, and as it's going back into Aquarius, is currently retrograde. And so we're still being encouraged to look back at where we started at the end of 2020 and at the beginning of the year, that like idealism that we had, that push towards the future, and really helping out society in general. I think with Mercury and Leo opposition Jupiter and Aquarius, eventually we're going to have, it all comes down to, and we see this reflected in the outer world, our ideal of individualism versus the benefits of collectivism. And so it doesn't matter what your viewpoints are necessarily, but some of us are thinking in a more individualistic way, and some of us are thinking in a more collective way. So we're really going to feel how that reflects back into the world around us. Sometimes Jupiter and Aquarius can feel a little bit alienating, because there is this mixture of the individualism that comes with Aquarius, but also the collectivism that's really important to the humanitarian aspects of it and building that utopian dream. So a lot of the Jupiter and Aquarius energy has to come from the self out into the world, and doesn't necessarily mean that we're taking like the way that we help other people from the outer world and in. It's coming from the inner world and out. So we have to we have to be more self-controlled. We have to regulate ourselves a little bit more in order to be tolerant, be cooperative, and be able to work towards equity, equality, and releasing oppression through and progress. So we're in a progressive time, and so that's going to affect each person on an individual level differently. But then I also want to say, like, maybe we think about this more collectively, because this is so collective, and like this is about expanding the collective. And then we have Mars entering Virgo on the 29th, which is Thursday. Mars entering Virgo, I like to think of it, do you guys know what like steampunk is, or like Victorian, like in the Victorian era where it was really popular? We had this like age of industry, and all of a sudden all these new technologies being created, and people like actively trying to create new things. And we got electricity and planes, more the Edwardian era, but they were starting it. And we had cinema and photography, and all these things were created in the Victorian Edwardian age. And to me, I think of Mars and Virgo kind of like that. And it's like there's this like well-oiled machine, and Mars and Virgo is the machine. So the shadow side of this obviously is that if we think of everything as like mechanized, then we fall too much into the industry of it, the productiveness of everything is overly mechanized, right? And we are living in this time of great collective trauma, and we can't always get up and be so hyper productive and stay even keeled and have everything be tempered. So we're going to be dealing with that energy of like, well, I have to go, go, go. I have to do. I have to be patient. I have to untangle myself from like my emotions in order to get things done. And yet that's not going to necessarily always be the healthiest thing for us. So part of the skills that we're developing during Mars and Virgo and how we step into our active selves is to like our becoming skillful at like self analysis, self-awareness, self-improvement while still being compassionate towards what we're going through. And I think Mercury in Leo is going to give us that voice for that. Venus is in Virgo as well. So Venus and Mars are teaming up to be like, how can you create more routine in your life, and how can you create more structure, and yada, yada, yada. Like, yes, that's nice. And for some of you, I'd say on an individual level, that'll be like very helpful for you. But I think we need to be a little bit more gentle with ourselves. So we have to watch out for that during Mars and Virgo. However, if you're ready to go to the next level in something and you really want to feel productive, feel industrious, feel like you have a direction and you can take action, this is a good aspect to do that. This is how you oil the machine, and you sort of, or you put everything, you sort of program it, and everything sort of goes in the way that it needs to be, so that you can leave the machine alone and walk away and do something else. And that's the ideal of Mars and Virgo. The machine does all the work and then you go and like you live your life. So if you can make that happen, that's awesome. Yeah, and that's what I've got for the ingresses. Jana, any insights on your end?
Yeah, you know, I couldn't help myself. I have to say so many things all the time, but I'm going to try and make it brief. This week is a major shifting week in the astrology. You can hear from Nadia, we're talking about a ton of ingresses where the planets are changing signs. I think we have some really interesting things that I wanted to highlight. And going back to the Aquarius full moon that we just had, I found it really interesting that on that moon that we're still in this Pluto Eris square, like Pluto and Eris is the sister of Mars. Is that right, Nadia? Yeah. Okay. So the sister of Mars, and so you can think of that like feminine Lord of War energy squaring off with the power heads of Pluto and Capricorn. And if you're watching only the mainstream media, you wouldn't have seen that there were protests all over the entire world this last weekend. Like literally all over the world, especially France, especially Italy, especially Australia. They were in San Francisco and Los Angeles. They were in Canada. They were, you know, all over the world. And a lot of astrologers have been saying that these protests are part of the expression that comes through this square between Eris and Pluto. And what we have with Jupiter stationing retrograde is that when Jupiter was in, or sorry, not stationing retrograde, pardon me, traveling back into Aquarius, is that Jupiter moves so fast through Aquarius, you guys. All you humans, I'm trying to stop saying you guys, I'm sorry. Jupiter moves so fast through Aquarius. It took like, I think it was 4 months, maybe 4 or 5 months to go through. And usually it takes like a year, but that's because the retrograde, like it went into Pisces and then it retrograded back. And so we're revisiting this Jupiter in Aquarius time. Now, when Jupiter was in Aquarius, this was it was a lot of lockdown and a lot of, control and restraints that were happening. And it doesn't totally make sense to me from an astrological point of view until I look at the fact that Saturn is also in Aquarius and we have this square between Eris and Pluto. And so Jupiter is actually taking a very long time to get to the 24-25 degree point where it touches the degree number that's going to put it sextile Eris, right? And then what I see is we're going to see a increase of control, or we're going to see an increase of perhaps protest, perhaps something. I just think that it's going to start to amplify that. But check this out. I was like, okay, so how long does it actually take to get there? Well, okay, so Jupiter moves into Aquarius on the 28th. Is that correct? Yeah, the 28th of July. To get to 28 degrees, it's not till August 13th. To get to 24 degrees, it's not till till September 15th. So for as fast as Jupiter was moving through Aquarius the first time, it's moving super, super slow through um, through Aquarius backwards. Now, just to give you an idea, Jupiter stations direct in Aquarius at 22 degrees Aquarius on October 17th. So I kind of like these dates. It's like the midway of each month. We're hitting some key moments in time. But I think that we can look at what's happening on Wednesday as a bit of a foreshadowing of that, right? Because it's when it moves back into the sign. And so on that same day, we have Venus squaring the North Node, putting us into this question like, wait, is what we're investing, are our values aligned with our purpose? You know, like poking the bear. Are your values aligned with your purpose? Are you expanding what you want to grow? Or are you expanding something different? Like that's a question, because here I've been noticing myself, I'm like, it's just, I mean, I'm asking myself some really big questions right now, and I'm watching myself go into language or daydream of things that I don't necessarily want to be creating. And so I'm working in myself to try and convert even that language. Like we're well, where we live, we're in the midst of forest fires, right? So we've got fires on every single direction of us, and they're super understaffed in the forestry, in the firefighting world. And so they're not actually trying to put out the fires. All they're trying to do is direct it away from the humans. So when I wake up, it's so gorgeous. It's like the most insanely beautiful orange sun, and the light that comes into my house is orange, but it's also so eerie because one wrong wind and there's no way out. We've got one direction, it's a ferry. How many cars can they take out at a time on a ferry? And the other way is straight into the fires, and the other way, there's one road for this entire area that I live. And so I'm like, what do we do? Do we invest in a pontoon boat so that if there's big fires and we can't go anywhere, we can go sit in the middle of the lake? Or do we, and I don't want to be having those thoughts, but I think all of us, if we look at our individual circumstances, we're playing in some of this thought realm that we maybe don't want to go into. And so what I've been trying to convert, like, okay, I'm not doing prepping, I'm homesteading. Yes, I'm homesteading. I'm thinking about my garden. I'm thinking about like making preserves. I'm thinking about having my fireplace, like all my wood stocked and ready in case we lose power. Like the power here is so fragile for us because these massive cables come across the lake. Those cables are out. We're out of power. Then what? Right? And so yeah, I want to have my firewood, I want to have a generator, I want to have things. And I'm not going doomsday prepping. I'm like, no, we're just homesteading. We're being self-sustained. We're building our off-grid reality. And now I'm speaking from a place where I live. That's not necessarily the same things at all that you would be considering living in a city. But I'm sure living in a city, like when I was in Los Angeles, I was like, well, are we earthquake ready? Like, what do I need if there's an earthquake? Or those thoughts. Um, Anyways, so just something just to think about as far as reframing and allowing yourself to be more expansive, like to work Jupiter in a way that's going to be helpful in how you want to be contributing, or how you want, like Nadia was saying, this collectivism. Like if I'm well prepared in my neighborhood, that takes the strain off the whole neighborhood, right? Anyways, and then when we have Mercury in Virgo and Mars in Virgo, I find that to be really interesting for the fact that Virgo tends to have people stuck in the minutia, like in the details. But I think that it's helpful. It can be super helpful as long as you don't let it turn into anxiety, because Virgo also is the land of nervous energy and anxiety and obsessive compulsive or that type of energy. And if people aren't used to it, like Nadia said, unless you have a Virgo stellium, like how do you deal with that kind of energy? And we're getting a lot of that in the Leo season, and then it's going to continue this when the sun moves into Virgo. So we have this like long stretch of, can you pay attention to the details? And so can you pay attention to the details in your communication? Can you pay attention to the details in what you're creating in your life? Can you pay attention to the details in, all of that stuff? And again, it's this reframe of, and every Virgo and Virgo stellium has done this in their life. And like we can be bombarded by the inner critic because it wants to fix it. It wants to make it better. That's what Virgo ultimately wants to do. It wants to bring it to the best possible expression that it can possibly be at. And so can you reframe whatever it is to be a more helpful, wholesome perspective and notice all the details? Like I laughed at Mark. I was like, okay, if we get a generator, that's great. Then we need gas, and then we need this, and then we need this. And so I'm like, we solved the problem we haven't got it yet, but this is where we're thinking, like by getting the generator. But then the generator, you start to think about it, and it's like, okay, we need gas for we need all these other things, and those details. If you don't think about those details, the investment in the generator becomes useless, right? Because you can't even use it anyways. So we can let ourselves go through those details. And, Thursday with Mars opposite Jupiter, I think is right before Mars moves into Virgo, is just doing exactly that. It's like opening up something. Like, are you actually thinking about the bigger picture of what you're passionately building, right? Or creating, because it's Leo. And then we get some time for integration after the Jupiter and Mars ingress. Of course, the sun is sextile the North Node, getting us to think about purpose again. And then the next day on Saturday, Mercury is sextile the North Node. So we've got a lot of North Node action happening, really thinking about, like, why am I here? What's my purpose? How am I meant to contribute at this time? And I use the word contribute intentionally with that Jupiter and Aquarius energy. And then Sunday, you guys, is just going off on the astrology. And so I think that goes like all week before and after. We have Mars square Lilith, the sun conjunct Mercury, Mercury opposite Saturn, the sun opposite Saturn. So it's a T square with Mercury, the sun, and Saturn. And that is, what happening? Well, Mars is squaring Black Moon Lilith. And if we look at it, it's like, okay, maybe I should bite my tongue. Maybe I don't need to say as much as I'm saying. Maybe I need to reel something in. Maybe I need to just look at how I'm communicating, what I'm communicating. And I think that, like, Nadia, can you remind me what you said this summer is? It's the intro. No, what did you say? You called it I loved it.
Radical contemplation, compassion, and expression.
Radical contemplation,
compassion and expression.
Radical contemplation, compassion, and expression, which is so much better. What I was calling it was the most introverted, extroverted summer on record. Right? Because like we need to take that time to be like, wait, how am I contributing? And I think that's a really important question to be asking, because yes, there is the individualism as Nadia was saying, but it is all like to get me healthy so that I can be part of the healthy whole, right? And then on Monday, which is the last day of this update here, we have Mercury trine Chiron, well, Venus trines Uranus. And if we think about that, if those are both harmonious energy, it's both communication, because Uranus and Mercury are kind of pals. They have a similar, but Mercury is for the personal and Uranus is for the collective, and they're both in trines with personally our wounds, but collectively are how we create harmony in our relations. And with that Uranus in there, it always is this little bit of unexpected information that could potentially be coming in. So I think this week, and I don't know if Nadia, I can't remember what you said if you said a week theme, but when I look at this week's theme, all I can think about is, all I feel actually is that we need to take enough pause to actually feel the shifting that is happening, because we're still in this quickening, this portal of transformation that is so profound that if we don't make time to pause and integrate, and I sound like a broken record saying this because I feel like I'm saying it every single week, but if we don't take the time to pause and integrate and really feel into what this now reality is, and we get too attached to the stories that we've been telling all along, we miss out on the ways that we need to transform and change. On my, I just was reading about the parks, how when we think about land back for the indigenous cultures in North America that were part of the genocide, like the historic genocides and colonialism, we as Westerners of colonized culture have this idea that the parks are meant to be saved and pristine so that nature can be nature, but we don't remember that they were actually, part of doing that is they removed the First Nations, the indigenous people of that land, off of that land. We took them off their land and said, no, you can't live here either. And then we put them like onto very select land where they actually could live, which completely destroyed their way of being, right? And the story that we're told is like, oh, the parks are so wonderful, they're so necessary, and then you look at it and it's like, oh no, they're a part of the destruction of these indigenous cultures. And just reading something as simple as that, it's like, oh, another story that I thought was so beautiful and wonderful that is part of this atrocious, horrific history that we have here in North America. And so there's a lot of catching up for us to do, no matter what the topic is that you're looking at. These are just some that I've been sort of focused on learning more about recently, but I'm sure that anybody listening has their own area of focus and their own topics that are of your own concern that we need to keep peeling back the layers and integrating and allowing our perspective to shift on those. So I think this is yet another week of feeling into it, allowing yourself to, we'll use our language, to attune to the deeper layers of reality that are being revealed. So we can then adjust the way that we're showing up. We can adjust our perspectives. We can adjust the way that we interact with our local communities. That's the North Node in Gemini is really saying local communities. The South Node in Gemini is saying it's not time to look out into the communities away from home. It's time to look into the communities here at home. And really, we have a lot of learning to do. We have a lot of reconciliation, repair work, and really altering the ways that we've been living. So that's my thing for this week. Not trying to be a Debbie Downer on that. I just think sometimes we need a good dose of here's what we are shifting, and I think when we look long term, it's important to notice where we may be feeling exhaustion on some of these topics. Like I find myself being like, I just want to break. I don't want to pay attention anymore. It's too much. And it's not actually a choice. We have to keep paying attention because there's a lot happening all at once. So thank you. Do you have anything else you want to add, Nadia? I know I just kind of went on a big tangent, but yeah, thank you.
No, I'm just going to sit with what you said. I think sometimes it's important to pay attention to what needs to be paid attention to, though, but not everything. That's what I want, because there's so much out there. There's too much information, and it's really important to pay attention to what's going on inside of you first and foremost,
Yeah.
and how you feel, before you pay attention to all the news and all the memes and all the social media. I mean, the stuff that keeps like the onslaught of tragedies. And, you know, I recently in the last 2 weeks just had a good friend pass away just out of the blue, not from COVID. And, you know, so many people were, we're so caught up in all this other stuff that's happening in the world that I think that it can affect our relationships with people that are close to us in a way where we're not paying attention to the things that really matters, which is our friends, our family, the way that we express love in that way. And because we're all so afraid and we're all so traumatized and we're all sort of caretaking, um, dealing with this collective grief. And I know that I'm maybe not making enough sense, but what I'm trying to say is that I think that some of us need to pay attention to how we're healing and just start there, and then sort of move out and then pay attention to, yes, the injustices and all this stuff that's been going on for hundreds of years and we should have been paying attention to anyways, regardless of like the political climate, regardless of what's happening in the world. You should have been paying attention to it anyways, but sometimes you have to step back and pay attention to yourself to make sure that you can keep a roof over your head and that you can feel, you know, sane in your day to day. And I think Virgo season is going to expand into that a little bit. And like how Jenna was saying at the beginning about how if you need to take care of yourself first, then it feeds into the individualism, and taking care of yourself feeds into the collective, and then you can take care of the whole community. And that's what I got to say about that. Let's go to some charts because we have we want to get through all of them, huh?
Well, I don't think we'll be able to get through all of them, but yeah. I don't think we'll be able to get through all of them, but we will. So I just want to say to anybody who's on YouTube, watching this on YouTube, we do this every week. You can come join us. We after we turn off the cameras to you at YouTube, we dive into charts of the people that show up on the live call, and everybody who is here is able to submit their chart, ask a question, and get a little mini reading based off those questions. So you can find us at attunetothemoon.com, and the class is called The Sacred Space.